Dad gifted my sister the $50 million firm I built. I walked away, joined our top client, and watched the family empire that tossed me aside suffer a total financial and emotional bankruptcy. My name is Declan. I am 36 years old, and for the better part of my adult life, my veins pumped wet cement instead of blood. I live in Chicago, a city famous for its skyline, its brutal winters, and its towering commercial real estate projects. My father, Vincent, owns a commercial construction firm that is currently valued at roughly $50 million. But let us get one thing straight right from the beginning. My father owns the paper, but I built the machine. I started working for the family business when I was 22. While my friends from college were backpacking across Europe or taking gap years to find themselves, I was strapping on steel-toed boots at 5 in the morning. I started at the absolute bottom. I hauled materials, I poured concrete in the freezing rain, and I learned how a building breathes from the foundation up. I did not want special treatment because of my last name. In fact, I worked twice as hard to prove I belonged there. I spent my nights taking engineering and project management classes, drinking gas station coffee to stay awake so I could estimate material loads the next morning. Over 14 years, I transformed my father's old-school, handshake deal business into a modern, streamlined $50 million empire. I implemented the software systems. I fired the lazy subcontractors. I negotiated the massive supply chain deals that padded our profit margins. I was the operations manager, but everyone in the industry knew I was the spine of the company. But building an empire requires a sacrifice, and the empire always takes more than it gives. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Allison. She was beautiful, patient, and completely out of my league. We had planned a 3-week anniversary trip to Mexico. The flights were booked, the resort was paid for. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, the scaffolding on our South Side commercial project collapsed. It was a disaster. State inspectors were swarming the site, lawsuits were brewing, and my father was having a panic attack in his office. I stayed. I canceled the trip. I spent the next 3 weeks working 90-hour shifts, navigating the legal mess, fixing the structural failures, and saving the company from a multi-million-dollar negligence lawsuit. When the dust finally settled and I went home, Allison's bags were packed. I will never forget what she said standing by the door. She looked at me, not with anger, but with total exhaustion. She said, "Declan, you are married to your father's company. There is no room in your life for me, and there never will be." She walked out, and I let her go, because deep down, I knew she was right. I justified the heartbreak the same way I justified the gray hairs and the sleepless nights. I told myself it was for the legacy. I told myself that one day, my father would step down, hand me the keys to the kingdom, and all the blood, sweat, and lost love would be worth it. I was a fool. While I was inhaling drywall dust and sacrificing my personal life, my younger sister, Penelope, was living a very different reality. Penelope is 34, 2 years younger than me, and the undisputed golden child of our family. After college, Penelope decided she needed to find her creative voice in New York City. For almost 10 years, my parents bankrolled her Manhattan apartment while she bounced from one vague marketing agency to another. She called herself a brand strategist, an influencer liaison, and a creative director. In reality, she took aesthetic photos in overpriced coffee shops and spent my father's money. She never showed any interest in the construction business. She hated the dirt, she hated the hours, and she hated the loud, aggressive nature of the industry. But 1 year ago, the New York novelty wore off. Her last agency let her go, and suddenly, Penelope decided she missed her family. My father welcomed her back to Chicago with open arms. He did not just give her a job, he immediately created a brand new executive position for her. Vice President of Strategic Growth. She was given a corner office, a massive salary, and an expense account that made my stomach turn. Penelope treated the construction firm like a Silicon Valley tech startup. She showed up at 10 in the morning wearing $3,000 Armani suits, carrying tiny designer bags that couldn't even fit a tape measure. She held pointless meetings where she threw around empty corporate jargon. Everything was about synergy, paradigm shifts, and agile workflows. She wanted to rebrand our company logo because the old one did not feel dynamic enough. It was an absolute joke. The project managers rolled their eyes behind her back. The foremen on the job sites actively avoided her. But the worst part was her profound, aggressive incompetence. She didn't know the difference between load-bearing structural steel and decorative rebar. Once, she burst into my office waving an invoice, furious that we were spending so much on reinforced concrete. She wanted to switch to a cheaper mix to boost our quarterly numbers. I had to slowly explain to her, like I was speaking to a toddler, that if we used the cheap mix, the parking garage we were building would literally collapse and kill people. She just waved her hand dismissively and said I was being too rigid. For 12 months, I acted as her secret babysitter. I quietly fixed her math errors on proposals. I smoothed over relationships with vendors she had insulted. I read her profit and loss statements for her because she could not understand a basic spreadsheet. I did it because I wanted the company to survive and because I still believed my father saw the truth. I believed he knew she was just playing dress-up and that when the time came, he would trust the son who built the house, not the daughter who just picked out the curtains. The illusion shattered on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. My father called an urgent family meeting in the executive boardroom. It was just the four of us, my father Vincent sitting at the head of the heavy mahogany table, my mother Diana sitting to his right, and Penelope and I sitting across from each other. My father cleared his throat, looking unusually nervous. He talked about his age. He talked about being 65, about feeling the weight of the years, and about wanting to spend his remaining time traveling with my mother. Then he dropped the blade. I have decided to officially retire at the end of the fiscal year, he said, folding his hands. And I am naming Penelope as the new chief executive officer of the company. The room went completely silent. The sound of the rain hitting the glass windows suddenly felt deafening. I sat there, frozen, staring at him. I was waiting for the punchline. I was waiting for him to say I would be the president, or that we would be co-owners. But he just kept talking. Penelope has the vision, my father continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed, defensive tone. The industry is changing, Declan. We need a fresh face, a modern approach. Penelope connects with the younger clients. She knows how to market our brand. He finally looked at me, offering a weak, patronizing smile. But do not worry, son. Your role is completely secure. You are crucial behind the scenes. You're the best operations manager in the state. Penelope needs you to keep the engine running while she steers the ship. I felt something cold and heavy drop into the pit of my stomach. Crucial behind the scenes. Keep the engine running. I looked at my mother. She refused to make eye contact with me, staring intently at her coffee cup. She knew. She had helped him make this decision. They had probably spent weeks discussing how to handle my reaction. Then I looked at Penelope. She was leaning back in her expensive leather chair, trying to look humbled, but she could not hide the absolute, smug triumph in her eyes. She smiled at me, a sweet, toxic little smile. I really hope we can work together on this, Declan, she said softly. I know the operations side is safe in your hands. I literally could not do this without you. She was right about one thing. She absolutely could not do this without me. In that exact moment, sitting in that freezing boardroom, something inside me permanently snapped. The anger, the 14 years of exhaustion, the ghost of my failed engagement to Allison, it all evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying, icy clarity. I had played the martyr for a family that viewed me as a piece of construction equipment. You do not hand the keys to the tractor, you just expect it to keep digging until the engine blows. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the mahogany table. I simply stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked my father dead in the eye. Congratulations, Penelope, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am sure you will do exactly what you are capable of. I walked out of the boardroom. The era of the loyal workhorse was over. It was time to let the new chief executive officer drive the car she just stole. Let us see how far she gets without the engine. The concept of quiet quitting is usually associated with lazy employees who do not want to put in effort. For me, it was not laziness. It was a highly calculated tactical retreat. I was going to give my father's company exactly what they paid for. No more and absolutely no less. Normally, my routine was punishing. I would arrive at the office at 6 in the morning to review overnight site reports before anyone else got there. I would work through lunch. I would leave around 7 or 8 at night, and my company's cell phone was glued to my hand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If a pipe burst on a site at 2 in the morning on a Sunday, I was the one who drove out in the snow to fix it. That weekend, I went to a local electronics store and bought a brand new personal smartphone. I ported over the contacts of my real friends and threw away the case. Monday morning arrived. Instead of my usual 6 a.m. start, I pulled into the company parking lot at exactly 7:55. I walked through the glass double doors at 8 a.m. sharp, holding a coffee, completely relaxed. Lydia, our head receptionist who had been with the company for 20 years, nearly dropped her headset when she saw me. "Declan," she asked, bewildered. "Is everything okay? You missed the early morning superintendent call." "Everything is perfectly fine, Lydia," I smiled, walking past her desk. "I am just working my scheduled hours." The day proceeded normally. I sat at my desk and handled the operations. I approved supply runs, I reviewed schedules, I answered emails. But I did it at a normal, human pace. I did not rush. I did not step out of my lane to assist the marketing team with a pitch. I did not correct the spelling errors on Penelope's memo. Then came the true test. 5 p.m. Usually, 5 p.m. was just the midpoint of my second shift. But as the clock struck 5, I closed my laptop. I took my company-issued smartphone, the device that had chained me to this firm for 14 years, and I placed it inside my bottom desk drawer. I locked the drawer with a physical key. I put on my coat and walked down the hallway. 3 different project managers stared at me as I headed for the elevator. "Leaving early, Declan?" one of them asked, looking genuinely confused. "Leaving on time," I corrected him. "Have a good evening, gentlemen." I walked out to my car, started the engine, and drove home. For the first time in my adult life, my passenger seat was not vibrating with panic calls from foremen. I went to a steakhouse. I ordered a medium-rare ribeye and a glass of expensive bourbon. I went home, laid in my bed, and slept for 12 uninterrupted hours. Meanwhile, inside a locked drawer in a dark office, my work phone rang silently. It was the sound of my family's safety net slowly unraveling. It did not take long for the first massive crack in the foundation to appear. It happened exactly 1 week later, involving the Westridge Medical Center project. Westridge was a multi-million-dollar hospital expansion. It was exactly the kind of massive, high-profile contract that my father loved, and winning it would guarantee our revenue targets for the next 2 years. The final proposal was incredibly complex, requiring thousands of line items for specialized medical-grade building materials. The proposal was due to the hospital board by Monday morning. On the Friday afternoon prior, at exactly 4:30, Penelope strutted into my office holding a thick manila folder. She dropped it on my keyboard with a dramatic sigh. "Here is the Westridge bid," she said, checking her reflection in my office window. "I need you to run the final numbers, check the material yields, and format the executive summary. Have it on my desk by Monday morning so I can sign it and send it off." Before I could even process the audacity, she turned around. "I am heading to a wellness spa in Wisconsin for the weekend to decompress. Being the incoming CEO is so draining. See you Monday, brother." She walked out before I could reply. In the past, I would have canceled my weekend plans. I would have ordered takeout, locked myself in the office, and spent 20 hours fixing her sloppy estimates to ensure the company won the contract. Instead, I looked at the folder. It was 4:45. At 5 p.m., I locked my work phone in the drawer, left the Westridge folder sitting exactly where she dropped it, and went home to watch a baseball game. Monday morning at 9 a.m., Penelope walked into my office. She was glowing from her spa retreat, holding a green detox smoothie. "Where is the Westridge file?" she asked, holding out her hand. I gestured to the corner of my desk. Right where you left it. Her face dropped. You didn't finish it? Declan, it is due in 1 hour. The courier is waiting downstairs. I don't work weekends, Penelope, I said, not taking my eyes off my computer screen. My contract clearly states my hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You handed me a 40-hour task with 30 minutes left in the work week. Her face turned a blotchy shade of red. Are you insane? This is a $20 million contract. We need this. I don't have time to review the math now. Then I suggest you put it in an envelope and hope for the best, I said calmly. A chief executive officer should know how to check her own numbers anyway. Panic consumed her. She grabbed the folder, ran out of my office, signed the unreviewed document, and gave it to the courier. We found out 3 days later. We lost the Westridge contract by a mile. Penelope had miscalculated the cost of medical-grade copper piping. She accidentally used the pricing for standard residential PVC pipes. Our bid was so catastrophically incorrect that the hospital board thought we were trying to run a scam. They threw our proposal in the trash and awarded the contract to our biggest competitor. My father was furious. Penelope was humiliated. And I sat in my office, drinking my morning coffee, watching the circus burn from a safe distance. Losing the Westridge bid was a heavy blow, but it was easily brushed off by my parents as a learning curve for Penelope. They convinced themselves it was a one-time mistake. They were wrong. Penelope's incompetence was not a bug, it was a feature. 2 weeks later, she nearly destroyed our oldest vendor relationship. Grandview Steel had been supplying our company since my father started the business. The owner, a man named Marcus, was an old-school, rough-around-the-edges steelworker who valued loyalty and straight talk. He did not use email if a phone call would do, and he absolutely despised corporate arrogance. Over the years, I had built a rock-solid relationship with Marcus. I drank beer with him, I knew his kids' names, and in exchange, he gave us priority shipping and massive discounts. Penelope decided that Grandview's invoices looked outdated. She called Marcus into a meeting to renegotiate our steel rates. I was not invited to this meeting, but the project managers told me exactly what happened. Penelope showed up 30 minutes late. She refused to shake Marcus's hand. She opened a PowerPoint presentation and lectured a man who had been pouring steel for 40 years about supply chain optimization and dynamic pricing models. She told him that if he did not cut his prices by 15% immediately, she would take our business to a foreign supplier. She thought she was being a ruthless, modern executive. She was actually just insulting a man with a very short temper. Marcus stood up, told her to go to hell, and walked out. An hour later, Marcus sent a fax to our office. He was pulling our priority credit line, halting all current shipments, and demanding immediate payment for outstanding invoices. This meant 3 of our active construction sites would run out of structural steel by Friday. It was an operational nightmare that would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in delay penalties. My office phone rang. It was my father. Get in my office. Now, he barked. When I walked in, Vincent was pacing behind his desk, his face purple with rage. Penelope was sitting on the sofa, looking small and defensive, clutching her designer handbag. Marcus at Grandview just halted our shipments, Vincent yelled, pointing a finger at me. 3 sites are going to shut down. I need you to call him right now. Take him to dinner. Buy him whatever whiskey he drinks. Use your relationship with him to fix your sister's mess before this bankrupts our quarter. I stood by the door, my hands casually resting in my pockets. I looked at Penelope, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and then back at my father. No, I said quietly. Vincent stopped pacing. What did you just say? I said no. I am paid the salary of an operations manager. My job is to ensure the materials arrive on site and the crews are deployed. Managing executive-level vendor relations and fixing a vice president's diplomatic blunders is above my pay grade. Declan, this is your family's company. Vincent roared, slamming his hand on the desk. You will do what I tell you to do. You made it very clear in the boardroom that this is Penelope's company now, I replied, my voice steady and cold. She is the visionary. She is the face of the clients and the vendors. If she broke the relationship with Grandview, she can figure out how to fix it. I turned around and grabbed the door handle. "Declan, if you walk out that door, you are crossing a line," my father warned, genuine panic finally bleeding into his anger. "I am just keeping the engine running, Dad," I said, looking over my shoulder. "But the engine doesn't steer. Let the new leader handle it." I walked out, leaving them in a suffocating silence. The realization was finally starting to set in. They had crowned a queen who didn't know how to rule, and they had alienated the only soldier who knew how to fight. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment down below telling us what city you are watching from. Every single comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the story. The Grandview Steel incident forced my father to personally drive out to Marcus's facility, apologize profusely, and accept a 5% price increase just to get our steel flowing again. It was humiliating for him, but instead of holding Penelope accountable, my mother convinced him that Penelope was just finding her footing. They were desperate to maintain the illusion. But the ultimate stress test was approaching, and it came in the form of Donovan Hayes. Donovan Hayes was a ruthless, self-made billionaire real estate developer. His firm, Hayes Corporation, accounted for 40% of our annual revenue. We built his luxury condos, his corporate parks, and his shopping centers. Donovan did not care about family legacies, he did not care about designer suits, and he certainly did not care about marketing buzzwords. He cared about numbers, structural integrity, and brutal efficiency. Hayes Corporation was planning their biggest project yet, a 90-story mixed-use tower in the heart of downtown Chicago. Winning the construction contract for the Hayes Tower would guarantee our firm's survival for the next decade. Losing it would mean immediate layoffs. Donovan requested an in-person presentation to go over the preliminary technical breakdown. He specifically wanted to know how we planned to handle the wind shear forces on the upper 30 stories without inflating the materials budget. It was an incredibly complex engineering problem. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday in our executive conference room. I was, of course, expected to be there to provide the answers while Penelope took the credit. But I had a different plan. I intentionally scheduled a routine site inspection on the other side of the city for early Thursday morning. I sent an email to Penelope and my father on Wednesday night, stating that due to traffic, I would likely arrive 30 minutes late to the Hayes meeting, and they should start without me. I arrived at the office at exactly 10:30. As I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, I could hear the disaster unfolding through the frosted glass doors. I pushed the door open quietly and slipped inside. The room was tense enough to choke on. Donovan Hayes, a silver-haired man with eyes like a hawk, was sitting at the center of the table. He was leaning forward, staring a hole right through Penelope. My father was sitting next to her, sweating through his expensive shirt, looking completely terrified. Penelope was standing at the head of the table, clicking a laser pointer at a generic slide on the projector. Her voice was shaking. "So, as you can see, Mr. Hayes," Penelope stammered, "our agile workflow will allow us to create a paradigm shift in how we approach the upper-level construction. We will utilize a synergistic framework to—" "Stop talking," Donovan Hayes interrupted. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a machete. Penelope froze, her mouth hanging slightly open. "I don't know what a synergistic framework is," Donovan said, tossing his pen onto the table. "I asked you a direct question about the tensile strength of the core column concrete mixed to withstand a 60-mile-per-hour crosswind. You have spent the last 25 minutes giving me a vocabulary lesson. Do you actually know how to build this tower, or am I wasting my morning?" My father jumped in, trying to save her. "Donovan, please, Penelope is just giving you the macro-level overview. The technical details are the only things keeping my building from falling into the street," Vincent, Donovan snapped, his patience entirely exhausted. He looked at his watch. "I think we are done here." He placed his hands on the table, preparing to stand up and walk out, taking 40% of our company's revenue with him. Penelope looked like she was about to cry. My father looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I slowly walked forward, pulling out a chair opposite Donovan. I dropped a thick, unmarked binder onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Sorry I am late, Donovan," I said, not looking at my father or my sister. Traffic on the interstate was a nightmare. But to answer your question about the core column concrete mix, you don't need a higher tensile strength mix for the core. You need to redesign the lateral dampeners on floors 70 through 80. Donovan paused. He slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes locking onto mine. "Explain," he said. "I didn't use a PowerPoint. I didn't use a laser pointer." For the next 45 minutes, I completely took over the room. I opened the blueprints, I drew mathematical equations on the whiteboard, and I systematically deconstructed his architect's flawed wind shear compensation plan. I proved to him that by shifting the mechanical dampening systems down by 5 floors, he could use standard high-strength concrete for the core, saving him roughly $4 million in specialized material costs while increasing the structural safety margin. I spoke with absolute authority. I was a surgeon dissecting a patient. I completely ignored Penelope, who had quietly sat down in the corner, her face pale with humiliation. I ignored my father, who was watching me with a mixture of overwhelming relief and growing horror as he realized how completely outmatched his chosen heir was. Donovan Hayes did not look at Penelope once. He didn't speak to my father. He only spoke to me. When I finished my breakdown and capped the dry erase marker, Donovan sat in silence for a long moment, studying the whiteboard. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "For $1 million saved before we even break ground," Donovan muttered, nodding to himself. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with profound respect. "That is why I do business with you, Declan. Brilliant work." He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. My father practically leaped out of his chair to shake Donovan's hand. "Thank you, Donovan," my father said, wiping his forehead. "We will get the revised proposal over to your team by the end of the week. Penelope and I will." "Have Declan send it to me directly," Donovan interrupted, not even looking at my father. "I want him managing this project from day one." "Good morning, Vincent." As Donovan walked toward the conference room door, he paused and looked over his shoulder at me. "Walk me to the elevator, Declan," he commanded. I left my father and sister standing in the wreckage of their own incompetence and followed the billionaire out into the hallway. Little did they know, the real disaster had not even started yet. I followed Donovan Hayes out of the executive conference room, leaving the heavy glass doors to swing shut behind us. The silence in the hallway was a stark contrast to the thick, suffocating tension we had just left behind. We walked side by side toward the elevator bank in complete silence. Donovan did not say a word until I pressed the down button and the quiet hum of the elevator gears kicked in. Donovan turned to face me. The polite, professional mask he wore for clients was completely gone. He looked at me with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. "How long are you going to keep playing the martyr, Declan?" Donovan asked, his voice low and direct. I looked at him, slightly taken aback. "I don't know what you mean, Donovan." "Do not insult my intelligence," he replied, letting out a short, cynical laugh. "I have been doing business with your father for a long time. I know how he operates. And I just watched your sister try to explain a 90-story structural load using marketing vocabulary she probably read in a magazine on the flight from New York. Your father is a relic and your sister is a liability. You are the only reason this company hasn't collapsed into a pile of rubble." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and the doors slid open. Neither of us made a move to step inside. "I am the operations manager," I said carefully, maintaining my professional neutrality. "My job is to ensure the projects are executed efficiently." "Your job is babysitting a sinking ship," Donovan corrected me, stepping closer. "Vincent is handing the company to the girl, isn't he? That is why she was leading the presentation. He is letting his ego and his blind spot for his daughter dictate the future of a $50 million firm." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence confirmed everything he already suspected. Donovan shook his head slowly. "Loyalty is a rare trait, Declan. But misplaced loyalty is just self-destruction. I do not do business with companies that are actively committing suicide. The only reason I haven't pulled my contracts is because I know you are the one actually running the sites. But I also know that with her at the wheel, you won't be able to catch every mistake. Eventually, she will make an error that you cannot fix, and it will cost someone their life, or it will cost me tens of millions of dollars. I will not take that risk. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, embossed business card. He handed it to me. It wasn't his standard corporate card. It had his personal cell phone number printed on the back. "I am expanding the Hayes Corporation," Donovan said, his tone shifting from observational to strictly business. "I am launching a new commercial development wing to handle our West Coast projects. I need a chief operating officer. I need someone who knows the concrete, the steel, and the math. I do not want a politician. I want a builder." I stared at the card in my hand. The weight of what he was offering settled over me. He was offering me an escape hatch. Not just a job, but the ultimate validation. "I am offering you full executive control over operations, a base salary triple what your father is paying you, and an equity stake after 5 years, Donovan stated clearly. "I recognize your value, Declan. Clearly, your own family does not. Think about it. But do not think too long. I want my tower built, and I want you building it from my side of the table." He stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and gave me a final, knowing nod before the stainless steel doors slid shut. I stood alone in the hallway for a long time. I looked down at the business card. For 14 years, I had believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough sleep, my father would eventually see my worth. But it took a billionaire client exactly 45 minutes to see what my father had ignored for over a decade. I slipped the card into my pocket. I didn't feel conflicted. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The invisible chains that had bound me to my father's legacy dissolved into thin air. I walked back toward my office, mentally drafting my resignation letter. The humiliation Penelope suffered in the conference room should have been a wake-up call. It should have forced her to step back, shadow me, and actually learn the business. But people with that level of extreme narcissism do not learn from humiliation. They just become reckless in their desperation to regain control. By the following Tuesday, the office was buzzing with an undercurrent of anxiety. Penelope had locked herself in her office for 2 days, refusing to speak to the engineering team. When she finally emerged, she looked terrifyingly pleased with herself. At 2 in the afternoon, my father's assistant came running down the hall, looking like she had seen a ghost. She told me to get to the executive office immediately. When I walked in, the scene was pure chaos. My father was clutching his chest, pacing behind his desk. The head of our estimating department, a seasoned veteran named Thomas, was sitting in a chair holding a printed email, shaking his head in disbelief. "What happened?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Your sister is going to bankrupt us," Thomas said, his voice flat and devoid of hope. He handed me the printed email. I read the text. It was a formal addendum sent from Penelope directly to Donovan Hayes' procurement team. In a desperate bid to prove her worth and smooth over the disastrous meeting, Penelope had unilaterally promised to accelerate the completion timeline of the Hayes Tower by 5 full months. She had signed a binding commitment guaranteeing the new date. I read the timeline again, doing the mental math. It was physically impossible under our current budget. "Tell me she didn't get this legally binding," I said, looking up at my father. "She signed it on behalf of the company," my father croaked, his face gray. "Donovan's lawyers accepted the addendum an hour ago. It is locked in." "She didn't consult operations," Thomas added, his voice rising in panic. "To shave 5 months off a 90-story build, we would have to run 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. The overtime labor costs alone will bleed our profit margin dry. We will have to pay premium expedited shipping for the structural steel. The entire project is valued at $18 million in profit for us. With this new timeline, we will lose at least $4 million just trying to meet the deadline. And if we fail, the delay penalties Donovan included in the original contract will literally liquidate this company." My father stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes wide with terror. Declan, you have to fix this. You know Donovan. You know his engineers. Call them. Tell them there was a miscommunication. Tell them we need the original timeline. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no urge to save the day. I cannot fix this, Dad, I said calmly. It is a legally binding contract signed by the chief executive officer. If I call Donovan and tell him our CEO doesn't know what she is doing, he will pull the entire contract for breach of confidence. He already suspects she is incompetent. This will just prove it. Then figure out the logistics, my father yelled, slamming his fists on the desk. Find cheaper materials. Cut the labor force. Do something. If I cut the labor force, we miss the deadline, I replied smoothly. If I find cheaper materials, the tower fails inspection. There is no operational magic trick to fix an $18 million lie. Penelope made a promise. Now the visionary has to figure out how to deliver it. She doesn't know how to deliver it, my father screamed, his voice cracking. She doesn't know anything about logistics, Declan. She was just trying to impress the client. Well, she impressed him, I said, tossing the printed email back onto Thomas's lap. She showed him exactly how willing we are to bleed money. I suggest you call the bank and see about expanding our credit line to cover the overtime. I turned around and walked out of the office. Behind me, I could hear my father collapse into his leather chair, the reality of his legacy crumbling around him. The empire was officially on fire, and I was holding the only fire extinguisher, completely refusing to pull the pin. They lasted exactly 5 days before the sheer terror broke their pride. It was a Sunday evening. I was sitting in my apartment, enjoying the quiet. My apartment was minimalist, clean, and free from the chaotic energy of construction sites. I was reviewing the contract Donovan Hayes had sent over to my personal email. It was a beautiful document, clear expectations, immense authority, and a compensation package that reflected true respect. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked over, looked through the peephole, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. It was my father and my mother. I opened the door. They looked awful. My father, who usually stood tall with the arrogant posture of a self-made millionaire, looked shrunken. His shoulders were slumped, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless, agonizing nights. My mother looked nervous, wringing her hands together, holding a fancy box of pastries from a bakery they knew I liked. It was a pathetic peace offering. "Can we come in, Declan?" my mother asked softly. I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. They walked into my living room, looking around awkwardly. They had rarely visited my apartment over the years. They were too busy hosting lavish dinner parties at their suburban estate. "Take a seat," I offered, not bothering to make small talk. They sat together on the sofa. I sat in an armchair opposite them, leaning forward, waiting. I knew exactly why they were here. The company accountants had probably run the final projections on Penelope's disastrous timeline, and the numbers spelled undeniable doom. My father cleared his throat. "Declan, we need to talk about the business. We need to talk about your sister." "There is nothing to talk about," I said simply. "She is the CEO. I am doing my job. The Westridge bid is gone, Grandview Steel hates us, and the Hayes project is going to hemorrhage money. I am just managing the daily operations, like you asked." "Please, Declan," my mother interjected, her voice shaking. "Your sister is drowning. She is having panic attacks. The subcontractors are threatening to walk off the job because she keeps giving them conflicting orders. The company, your father's legacy, is falling apart." "It is her legacy now, Mom," I corrected her coldly. "You two made that very clear in the boardroom." My father held up a hand, stopping my mother. He looked at me, swallowing hard. It was taking every ounce of his pride to say the next words. "I made a mistake, Declan," Vincent said, his voice thick with reluctance. I let my desire to see Penelope succeed cloud my judgment. I underestimated how much this company relies on your specific expertise. I overestimated her ability to learn the ropes." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather folder, placing it on the coffee table between us. We want to fix this, my father continued, his eyes pleading. We want to make things right. Inside that folder is a drafted agreement. We want to name you co-CEO alongside Penelope. You will have equal executive authority. And when I officially pass on the ownership, it will be a 60-40 split. 60% for you, 40% for her. You will be the majority owner. My mother leaned forward, smiling tearfully. It is everything you ever worked for, Declan. You will finally have the title you deserve. We can be a family again, running the empire together. I stared at the leather folder on the table. 5 years ago, I would have cried tears of joy. I would have hugged them, thanked them, and immediately gone to the office to start fixing the mess. But looking at them now, I felt an overwhelming wave of disgust. A compromise, I said softly, leaning back in my chair. A partnership, my father corrected quickly. No, I shook my head, my voice dripping with cynical realization. This is not a partnership, and it is certainly not an apology. You did not come here because you suddenly realized my value as a son, or because you respect my 14 years of sacrifice. You came here because your bank accounts are bleeding. My mother recoiled as if I had slapped her. Declan, how can you say that? We are giving you the company. You are giving me a sinking ship and asking me to bail out the water so your golden child doesn't drown. I raised my voice, the suppressed anger finally cracking the surface. You didn't offer me co-CEO a month ago when the company was highly profitable. You looked me in the eye and told me to stay in the background. But now that Penelope has weaponized her incompetence and put a target on your $50 million fortune, suddenly I am worthy of a title. My father's face hardened, his old authoritative anger flaring up. We are offering you majority ownership. We are swallowing our pride to save this family, and you are throwing it in our faces out of spite. It is not spite, Dad, I said, my voice dropping back to a freezing calm. It is an accurate assessment of my market value. You do not respect me. You only respect what I can do for your wallet. And the worst part is, you still want to keep her as co-CEO. You still want me to do 100% of the work, while she keeps 50% of the title and 40% of the money. You want me to be her permanent safety net. I stood up. The negotiation was over. I decline your offer, I said. The air in the apartment grew completely stagnant. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly open, unable to comprehend that I had just rejected majority ownership of a $50 million firm. He had always believed that money and titles were the ultimate leash. He didn't understand that the leash had snapped weeks ago. You decline, my father whispered, the anger slowly replaced by sheer disbelief. Declan, if you do not step up and take control of the Hayes project, the delay penalties will bankrupt us. We will lose the company. We will lose everything. I know, I replied smoothly. I walked over to the small console table by the door, opened the drawer, and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I walked back and dropped it directly on top of his leather co-CEO folder. What is this? My father asked, staring at the envelope like it was a live grenade. That is my formal 2 weeks' notice, I stated. I am officially resigning from my position as operations manager. I will spend the next 14 days documenting my daily workflows so Penelope can easily transition into taking over the logistics. After that, I am entirely done. My mother let out a small, choked gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Tears began to stream down her face. My father didn't touch the envelope. His face went from pale to a dangerous shade of crimson. He stood up, towering over the coffee table, his fists clenched at his sides. You are abandoning your own blood, Vincent spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. After everything I provided for you, after I gave you a career, you are going to let your sister fail? You are going to let my legacy turn to dust because your feelings are hurt. You didn't give me a career, I fired back, stepping right up to him, refusing to back down. I built my career with my own 2 hands. I sacrificed my youth, my relationship with Allison, and my sanity to build your empire, and you handed it to a girl who thinks a tape measure is a fashion accessory. You abandoned me in that boardroom, Dad. I am simply matching your energy. Where will you even go? My mother cried out, her voice hysterical. Nobody in the city will hire you when they find out you walked out on your own family in a crisis. I couldn't help it. A dark, cynical smile spread across my face. Actually, Mom, I already have a new position lined up, I said, watching my father's eyes carefully. I am joining the Hayes Corporation as their new Chief Operating Officer. I start the 1st of next month. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off, before the debris starts hitting the ground. My father stumbled backward slightly, the back of his knees hitting the sofa. He looked like I had just driven a knife straight through his chest. Donovan? My father choked out, the reality of the situation finally crushing the last of his arrogance. You are going to work for Donovan Hayes? Yes, I nodded. Donovan recognizes my value. He offered me a massive salary, executive control, and an equity stake without me having to beg for it. And, just so we are completely clear, Donovan told me that the only reason he hasn't pulled his contracts yet is because he was waiting for my transition. Once I am officially at Hayes Corp., he is going to audit every single inch of Penelope's work. Good luck. You are a traitor, my father roared, the veins in his neck bulging. You are actively destroying us. A CEO should know how to handle losing a key employee, Dad, I said, walking over to the front door and opening it wide. I suggest you and the visionary get back to the office. You have a lot of work to do. My mother stood up, sobbing openly now, refusing to look at me. She grabbed her purse and practically ran out the door. My father stood there for a long moment, staring at me with a look of pure hatred mixed with devastating loss. The illusion of his power was gone. He was just an old man realizing he had bet everything on the wrong horse. He walked out without another word. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in 14 years, my shoulders felt light. 8 months later. If you had told me a year ago that I would be standing in a corner office on the 60th floor of the Hayes Tower, drinking premium espresso and looking out over the Chicago skyline, I would have said you were crazy. But here I was. The transition to Hayes Corporation had been seamless. Donovan Hayes was exactly the kind of leader I respected, brutal, fair, and entirely merit-based. He didn't care about my last name. He only cared about results. And I delivered. In my first 6 months as Chief Operating Officer, I completely restructured his commercial development wing. I streamlined the supply chain, cut redundant administrative waste by 20%, and implemented a digital tracking system that kept every project ahead of schedule. Donovan was so impressed that he fast-tracked my equity stake. I was no longer just an employee. I was a partner in a billion-dollar machine. More importantly, my life outside of work actually existed. Because the systems I built were efficient, I didn't need to work 90-hour weeks. I left the office at 6 p.m. I went to the gym. I bought a boat and spent weekends on Lake Michigan. I even started dating again, taking a brilliant architect named Sarah out for dinners without checking my phone every 5 minutes. The chronic pain in my shoulders disappeared. The gray hairs stopped multiplying. I was happy. Truly, deeply happy. But I am not going to lie and say I didn't keep an ear to the ground regarding the family business. The construction industry in Chicago is a small town. Everybody talks. And the rumors about my father's firm were grim. It started slowly. Shortly after I left, Donovan Hayes executed his threat. He sent his legal team to audit the Hayes Tower addendum that Penelope had signed. When they confirmed she had materially breached standard safety timelines, Donovan pulled the $18 million contract entirely, citing gross incompetence. That was the domino that started the collapse. Without the Hayes contract, the firm could not secure the bank loans needed to cover the payroll for their other sites. Penelope, entirely out of her depth, panicked. She started firing experienced superintendents to cut costs, replacing them with cheap, inexperienced labor. Quality plummeted. 2 different buildings failed state safety inspections in a single month, resulting in massive government fines. Grandview Steel, remembering Penelope's arrogance, called in their debts and sued the company for breach of contract. I heard that Penelope stopped wearing her designer suits. Then, she stopped showing up to the office altogether, claiming she needed a mental health sabbatical to deal with the toxic work environment. She retreated back to the mansion, leaving our 65-year-old father to clean up the catastrophic mess she had created. Vincent tried. He really did. He practically lived at the office, trying to secure emergency funding, trying to beg old clients to trust him again. But the magic was gone. The industry knew that the brains behind the operation had defected to Hayes Corporation. Nobody wanted to do business with a dying empire run by a desperate man. I watched it all happen from a distance, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate their downfall. It was just a mathematical certainty playing out in real time. If you remove the load-bearing pillar from a structure, gravity does the rest. I thought I had moved on completely. I thought I was immune to the wreckage. Until the phone rang in the middle of the night. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 8 months after I walked out of my apartment and left my parents staring at my resignation letter. I was asleep when my personal cell phone began vibrating on the nightstand. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:30 in the morning. I answered the call, my voice thick with sleep. "Hello, Declan? It is Lydia." I sat up instantly. Lydia, the veteran receptionist from my father's firm. I hadn't spoken to her since my final day, though I had made sure she received a glowing recommendation letter, knowing she would soon need it. Her voice was trembling, thick with tears. "Lydia? What is going on? Why are you calling me at this hour?" "I am so sorry to wake you, Declan," she sobbed softly. "I didn't know who else to call. Your mother, she is inconsolable. I am at the hospital." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. "Hospital? Who is in the hospital?" "It is your father," Declan, Lydia said, her voice breaking. "He collapsed at the office late tonight. The cleaning crew found him in the boardroom. He suffered a massive myocardial infarction. A severe heart attack. They rushed him into emergency surgery. It is bad, Declan. It is really bad." I closed my eyes, running a hand over my face. The detached, cold businessman facade I had built over the last 8 months cracked instantly. He was still my father. "Is he alive?" I asked, my voice tight. "He made it through surgery, but he is in the intensive care unit." "He is very weak," Lydia explained, blowing her nose into the phone. "Declan, you need to know, the company is gone. The lawyers filed the Chapter 11 bankruptcy papers yesterday morning. The bank seized the equipment. Penelope locked herself in her bedroom at your parents' house and refuses to come out. Your father was at the office trying to box up the personal files when his heart just gave out from the stress. A $50 million empire, gone in less than a year. The legacy he had sacrificed my happiness for, the company he had handed to an incompetent child out of blind favoritism, had literally broken his heart." "Which hospital, Lydia?" I asked, throwing the blankets off and grabbing my clothes. She gave me the address. I thanked her, hung up, and dressed in the dark. The drive to the hospital was a blur of empty highways and flashing streetlights. My mind raced through 100 different emotions. Anger at Penelope for destroying him. Anger at him for letting her do it. But mostly, a profound, crushing sadness for the sheer, avoidable waste of it all. They could have had it all. We could have ruled the industry. But greed, ego, and favoritism had burned the castle to the ground. I pulled into the hospital parking garage, the cold night air hitting my face as I walked toward the glowing red emergency entrance. I prepared myself for the worst. I prepared myself for screaming, for blame, for my mother to point a finger at me and tell me it was my fault for leaving them. I walked up to the intensive care unit floor. The hallways were sterile, bright, and suffocatingly quiet. I found the room number Lydia had texted me. Through the glass window, I saw the ruins of my family. My mother was sitting in a plastic chair beside the bed, looking like she had aged 20 years. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled. She was holding the limp hand of the man in the bed. My father, Vincent, the titan of Chicago commercial construction, looked incredibly small. He was hooked up to a dozen different monitors, tubes running into his arms and throat. The rhythmic, slow beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. And standing in the corner, staring blankly at the floor, was Penelope. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The $3,000 designer suits were gone. The corporate jargon was gone. She just looked like a terrified, broken little girl who had finally broken the one toy nobody could fix. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound made my mother look up. When she saw me, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears, but she didn't yell. She didn't blame me. She just looked at me with an expression of total, absolute defeat. Penelope looked up, her face pale and puffy from crying. She opened her mouth to speak, maybe to defend herself, maybe to beg for forgiveness, but the words died in her throat. She looked down at her shoes, unable to hold my gaze. The narcissistic spell was broken. The reality of her actions, the bankruptcy, the lawsuits, the father fighting for his life in a hospital bed, had finally crushed her ego into dust. I walked over to the opposite side of the bed. I looked down at my father. He was awake, though heavily sedated. His eyes slowly fluttered open, struggling to focus on the harsh fluorescent lights. He turned his head slightly, and his eyes locked onto mine. For a long minute, neither of us said anything. The beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. Then, my father squeezed his eyes shut, and a single tear rolled down his cheek, disappearing into the oxygen mask over his mouth. He weakly lifted his hand, motioning for me to come closer. I leaned down. He pulled the mask away from his mouth just enough to speak. His voice was a raspy, broken whisper. I lost it, my father breathed, his eyes wide with a haunting realization. I lost the company. I lost everything. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had worked me to the bone, who had demanded my absolute loyalty, only to cast me aside when it suited his vanity. I expected to feel vindicated. I expected to feel the sweet, hot rush of revenge. I wanted to lean in and say, "I told you so." But I didn't feel anything hot. I just felt a cold, empty pity. "You didn't lose the company, Dad," I said, my voice steady, carrying no anger, only the brutal, objective truth. The company was just brick, steel, and contracts. The actual asset was the people who knew how to build it. You threw the asset away. The collapse was just a matter of time. He closed his eyes again, his chest heaving with a weak, rattling breath. I was a fool, Declan. I let my pride. I let my favoritism blind me. I thought she could learn. I thought the title would make her ready. I destroyed my own legacy. He looked at Penelope in the corner. She began to sob silently, her shoulders shaking. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading for something. Absolution? Forgiveness? "I am sorry, son," my father whispered. "I am so sorry." I stood up straight, looking down at the ruined titan. "I forgive you, Dad," I said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild a $50 million firm. You made a business decision based on emotion, and the market corrected the error. It is over." I looked at my mother. I looked at Penelope, the golden child who had finally burned her own fingers playing with fire. They were going to have to sell the estate to pay the creditors. Penelope would never work in executive management again. They were facing total financial and emotional bankruptcy. There was nothing left for me to do here. I had paid my respects to the dead empire. I turned around and walked out of the hospital room. I walked down the sterile hallway, took the elevator to the lobby, and stepped out into the crisp, early morning Chicago air. The sun was just beginning to rise over the skyline, casting a golden light over the skyscrapers I had helped build and the new ones I was going to build with Donovan Hayes. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from my past. The invisible chains were permanently broken. I was finally, truly free. Looking back at the ruins of a $50 million empire and my father lying in that hospital bed, a small part of me wonders if my absolute, cold detachment crossed a line. They betrayed me and used me for 14 years, but they are still blood. Am I the jerk for walking away and letting their life's work turn to dust, or did I simply give them exactly the CEO they asked for? Thank you for listening to this story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our daily drama. Drop your verdict in the comments below. Was Declan right to walk away? See you in the next video.